Well, Levi, welcome back to State House. The last time we talked, we were talking about the immigration issue and border security and what was going on down the valley. You've done a bunch of work down there when you were at the AG's office, and we touched on one of the subjects we touched on. We didn't go deep, and this is what I want to talk about today. Was how the non-governmental organizations, the NGOs, as everybody knows them, were involved in kind of all sides of what's going on, helping people come across the border illegally, working on both sides, and then what we're seeing today, which is these huge protests, slash riots in L.A., and how they're involved in that as well. And there's so much to that I thought this would be a great time for us to get a little deeper into that subject.
Yeah, and I appreciate you having me on again. So one of the things, whenever we were looking at the border NGOs down south, the way they were kind of operating, a lot of them were getting non-governmental money from like the Soros entities, like open societies, and that was kind of the things you can't really do anything about that. You follow the rabbit trail, and you're like, okay, this is why he's funding this project. He's funding it for a reason. With the government funding, that was where the biggest issue was coming into play. They were making money off this program called the EFSP, the Emergency Food Shelter Program, that was administered by FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And the ESFP, the way this program was meant to run was all the money was supposed to go south to towns on this side of the Rio Grande, our towns.
Okay.
And the idea was this money will go south. It'll help the local communities deal with this massive influx of essentially homeless people who have come across the border suddenly. They can't get rid of them. They can't send them back. They can't do anything.
And just for our listeners and viewers, one thing that, just so they understand why that's important is counties are limited in the amount of money that they get. They can only through their tax base, and so they really don't have a ton of money, and so the state doesn't really give them a ton of money, and so if the federal government can't help them, then the people who live in that county have to take care of them, and if all of the illegal immigrants are coming across in a few counties, which is exactly what was happening, then all of the burden lands on those counties. So that there was a real purpose probably behind it when they started it. That was the real purpose behind it.
Right, absolutely. That's what it was. Like McAllen and Brownsville, they were getting hammered.
Yeah.
And so the idea was, I think, the good idea that's gone bad was the federal government was going to fund these local communities of like, hey, look, we're dumping these people here. We're not going to send them back. You're going to have to deal with them, but we'll help you out on the back end, and we'll give you money to facilitate where they were going to live north of the Rio Grande. Now, this is where it gets wonky, though, is what these entities started doing, and what they either quickly realized or it was part of the plan, was they started sending that money south of the border. Okay, well, now you've got a different problem, because you've got this money that's going south of the border being used to entice people. And what we saw from, working with Todd Bensman and working with like Mike Howell and the Oversight Project, cannot say enough good things about those guys, it was that they were collecting them in these little church, well, they'll call them churches. They really weren't. They were just collection spots south of the border. They would collect them there. That's where the EFSP money would go down to help them out. Collect them there while these people waited for their USCPB1 appointment. And I'll just tell your listeners again, with USCPB1, it was this application that USCIS, the United States Customs Enforcement Service Association, it was an app that they had given out. You can I don't know if you can still download it, but at the time you could download it. Yeah. And basically you could just, on this app, you could just schedule an appointment with customs to get through. And so these folks were coming all the way up through Mexico, and the American NGOs were sending money south of the border to collect these folks there while they waited for their appointment to come across.
So just a holding area for everybody looking for an appointment.
That's exactly right. So in that sense, and they were very clever about it. There were some entities that, they would there's one that it had sandwiches. They handed out sandwiches and waters on Saturday. And then the rest of the millions of dollars were going south of the border. It was like $2,000 a month to each individual entity, which that's not a lot, but I mean, in Mexico, and you're talking about like without fail, it's $2,000 going to 3 or 4 separate entities. That was their primary business. And then one of the biggest ones is Catholic Charities Rio Grande Valley. I think whenever we talked last time, we talked about the way we tracked a lot of the money they were getting was through fedspending.org, which is an open source. It's supposed to be a government transparency thing. And so you can actually see what grants each entity is entitled to and where it's coming from. So Rio Grande Valley, Catholic Charities Rio Grande Valley, was getting grants from the EFSP, from FEMA. And I can tell you for a fact, like the head of that, the head director, Sister Norma Pimentel, she makes no reservations about going south of the border. I know that case is probably still pending, so I won't go into too much detail. But I think, like, honestly, if you asked her, like, hey, are you bringing people up from Mexico? She'll either tell you, yes, I am, or she'll have some canned response her lawyers told you said to say. But
Yeah.
the other entity was Annunciation House, and that case was just decided in the Supreme Court of Texas. It's going to go back down to trial, and we'll have to see what they do there. But Ruben Garcia, he made no reservations. He is very proud of what he's doing.
What was the outcome of the Annunciation House?
Yeah, so Annunciation House. So that case, that was a case where we investigated Annunciation House in El Paso. The issue was, or the question to be asked was whether or not they were harboring illegal aliens, and there was a long debate throughout the entire case on whether or not it was harboring or sheltering. Going backwards in time, administrative subpoenas were served on Annunciation House requesting to review their records. They denied. They said, no, we're going to talk to our lawyer. Okay, well, you got a couple hours to figure that out because we need to know this. Otherwise, we're going to have to initiate action. And they immediately just sued and requested an injunction. It was granted in El Paso County, and then there was a direct appeal to the Supreme Court of Texas. The Supreme Court of Texas decided, I'm going to go to my notes here. It was actually it's one of my favorite opinions, but it's like 63 pages long.
Oh, God.
And it was written by Justice Young. It really is one of the best opinions I've read, not just because I was involved in that case. But I think it was an 8-0 decision with Judge Sullivan abstaining, basically saying that the court could not limit the Attorney General's right to use what's called quo warranto. That was essentially what the legal mechanism that was engaged in to try to get to the bottom of this. And so what they said was look, we're not going to determine whether or not this business should be shut down, but what we're saying is the record's not complete. You cannot stop the Attorney General's office.
So they're not even on the real case. They're on the process.
That's right. That's
Okay.
right. Well,
Okay.
but
You got to get through that to get to the case.
But what's amazing about this is a couple of things. Number one, the quo warranto, the court says it in their opinion, they have not looked at quo warranto they said over 100 years, but then they cited a 1941 opinion. I'm not going to knock that, but 1940, that's still 80 years, right? And, it was such a unique, we did research on it. This is a power that is all the way back to England, back to the 13th century. It's engrossed in common law, and it is in basically the way the Constitution is drafted for the Attorney General's office is they have, in regards to quo warranto, he has the right to pursue quo warranto unless expressly limited by the legislature. Well, what the court looked at, Annunciation House made an argument that the Business Organizations Code did not allow the Attorney General to seek forfeiture of this company because it wasn't prescribed in the Business Organizations Code. And the court said, no, that's a limitation under certain facts, but the Attorney General always has the right to do quo warranto. So then I tell you what, I mean, I wish this opinion had been drafted before we started this case because it was phenomenal. The history of quo warranto. I learned a lot more than I knew whenever we decided to use it. So.
Yeah. So you've got these two organizations, Annunciation House and Catholic Charities, working cross border. And when you say the money goes across the border, is it going to some other organization over there that's on the Mexican side that is set up to receive the money, or do they go across there and just utilize that money to have their own another sister organization on the Mexican side?
Well, and that's a good question because it actually varies based on it's this is very odd, and I'm not saying these people are connected with the cartels,
Right.
but it's well known on border stuff that the cartels, each individual part of the border, has a different cartel in charge of it. Each cartel has kind of a different way of doing business. And so what was interesting about the NGOs is we found that they all had different ways of doing business. So like Annunciation House had an entity that was across in Juarez. They had an entity that was across in Juarez. They closed it down, and they had largely, for them, the case theory was more or less harboring. They had limited their resources to where they were just collecting people that snuck across and then sneaking them in their building, and they wouldn't let anybody go in. Allegedly, I'll say that since the case is still pending. Team Brownsville was another one, and that one actually was connected with the Resource Center Matamoros. They were going directly south, so Team Brownsville was funding entities that were going south, and then Resource Center Matamoros had an entity that was south. I don't know if it's still working, but I know Anthony Rubin did a story on that where he went down there, and there were some flyers on bathrooms saying "Vote for Joe Biden." Very nefarious stuff. So you kind of saw a mix in Brownsville, and then McAllen, it would all be Catholic Charities. So Catholic Charities would have its own entities south of the border in, it starts with Reynosa. In Reynosa, I think, yeah.
Right. Okay.
So it just depended where you were.
That's interesting. So every time we talk about this issue, it always, because I've either been on boards or I've started organizations which had 501c3s, and they are, they would look at us every year and make sure that we were doing the right thing. And our C3 status, which is a tax exempt status, for those that don't know what 501c3 is, it's just a code in the tax code that says they don't have to pay taxes, and so they call them charitable organizations or non-governmental organizations. But I mean, we were always working to make sure we could keep our C3 status, and I guess we're only 6 months into a new administration that actually cares about that. But my question is, I know there's been a lot of work done on the USAID stuff, which is connected, and we can talk about that too, because that's kind of the other thing I wanted to talk about is, all right, now we've got all these people that have been brought over by with the help of these organizations, and now we're having all of this anti-ICE. It's just a mixture of all kinds of crazy stuff, but really it starts with the anti-ICE stuff. Matter of fact, the protest that was here in Austin, we're sitting here right in front of the Capitol, and I was here for 5 hours of it, trying to document it, and it was mostly the immigration stuff. You had Palestine, and you had some trans folks there, and some other things, because it was kind of a anti-administration protest, right? But it was really, the vast majority were there for the immigration, and as I mentioned to you earlier, we were watching, and you could see some of the people that were. I had never seen it because I had not been to one of these before. Yeah. So it was very interesting. We got right in the middle of it all. And there were people on the outskirts that I noticed. They were very careful, but they had the little vest on, looked like they're crossing guards, and they had clipboards. And I'd see them running around. I didn't notice them at first. I wasn't paying attention because there was so many people. And then I noticed that they were sitting there. They had these clipboards. I could never get a good picture of what it was. But have you looked into that? Does that transfer, or that kind of money transferring to? We hear about it, that they're being used to organize all of these protests on behalf of these organizations or people who are funding them.
Yeah, that was something that I know we had talked about it, and I had kind of been following it. There were. This is Austin. We get protests all the time.
Yes.
Whenever you're going through the laundry list of people that showed up, I'm like, oh, okay, so it was Austin on a Saturday, right?
Right.
But there were 3 protests scheduled that day. At 09, there was the We're Done rally. That was, I think, more conservative leaning, but it was over property taxes. That would have been organic. It had kind of a normal organic turnout. And then in the afternoon, you had what I think would have been an organic rally. It was the Kick Out the Clowns rally. I don't know who organized that, but it seemed more natural. But they were actually partnered with the No Kings rally, which is the one that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And yeah, looking at the funding for these entities, what's crazy is, there's I think their name is Data Republican. They did this whole spiel on how much they were connected. And so whenever we talked about it, I was like, well, let's go see how connected they are. And what I found was actually really interesting, because there were some of the same funders who were funding border stuff that were funding another group, the Media Matters group.
Okay.
And so Media Matters, for those that aren't aware, I think everybody knows, they brand themselves as sort of a government accountability entity. I would say they're more akin to the Pravda, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so there was a case that I worked on where they had done some stuff, and I think that case is still pending. They obviously sought an injunction, like all these entities do. And what was interesting about Media Matters is they were represented by Mark Elias, which, as everybody knows, is the progenitor he used to work for Perkins Coie. He's a big Democrat lawyer. He litigates election cases. He seeks favorable opinions in the offseason. So Media Matters was this weird entity that I was like, wait a minute, for like a media entity, in quotes, like they are very well connected to the government. So I started going deep, and one thing that I saw is like the Tide Center, for example. They're kind of like, obviously open societies, George Soros, they're involved in all this. But you take a look at like the Tide Center, they're kind of like I would say a less influential entity than open societies. They were involved in the No Kings thing and in Media Matters. Open societies, George Soros was involved in Border, Media Matters, and No Kings, funding the same people. Center for Biological Diversity, I just picked one out of a hat. Border, Media Matters, No Kings. The Color of Change, Border, Media Matters, No Kings.
Wow.
Interfaith Alliance Foundation, for sure. Border, Media Matters, No Kings. And one of them, one of the biggest funders of all this is this National Democratic Institute. And, and maybe I should have known about these people, but I didn't. And so I go to look at what National Democratic Institute is, and it's a nonprofit, but they, quote, National Democratic Institute promoted democratic reform in the Philippines and Chile in the 1980s, in Eastern Europe after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and across Africa, Asia, Latin America in the 90s. And I was like, this looks like a USAID shell.
Exactly.
And I was like, there's no way it's just sitting right here. But I think now it probably is. And there's one entity that I just want to, I skipped over them because this is something that's been, it's a little risky. I mean, it's not risky, but it's really unfortunate. But like the International Red Cross.
Yeah.
And now the International Red Cross is broken up into several subcategories, but they were all over the border. They were absolutely involved with the border to the point where they were doing these maps to show people literally how to get on the death train, how to get off the death. I mean, it was a how-to guide for how to get to America and get through Mexico, which is crazy because in order to pass through Mexico, you would have to claim asylum from the country you were at. So what the reason why they jettison these illegal immigrants would jettison their IDs prior to getting to our border is that way American authorities wouldn't confirm that they were asylees in Mexico, because if you've got asylum in Mexico, you're not qualified for asylum in the United States. Anyway, point being, Red Cross kind of walked them through this, and then so it's like, well, why is the Red Cross involved in No Kings? and yeah, I mean, it's the same group. It's this self-fulfilling thing.
Well, and I think I want to say I read that the Red Cross, which is it sort of boggles my mind that the organization, as I know it, can get away with that. And I mean, I guess they do so much good, and that's you and I both know that stuff that they do that's really good. But there's also this fringe piece of them, whatever it is, 20% or whatever it is of them that but I've heard that they went all the way down to the, South America, where a lot of this starts, and that they were essentially shepherding these people all the way through the process till they got into the United States.
They were at. I always think about like what if you run a marathon, you have these or a 5K. I'm not running a marathon now.
Yeah, let's go with 5K.
Yeah, let's go with 5Ks. You're gonna have water stations set up. That was the Red Cross for the border issue, which I mean, like I said, the border cases were tricky because I will say that I think a lot of these people thought they were doing good. Their version of good.
Yeah.
These people are coming, they're pursuing this dream and we want to protect them, yada, yada, yada,
Right,
whatever the case
right.
may be. But the problem is there's always someone who's going to take advantage of that. And so, a lot of these entities that were in Texas, at least, they were part of the cartel travel package.
Yeah.
Like, hey, do you want to go to America? We can get you to America. All we've got to do is get you to this place. If we can get you to Tapachula, we'll put you on a bus. We'll get you from Tapachula all the way up to Reynosa. And then once we get to Reynosa, we've got people on the other side that'll just walk you right across, or you'll get there and you'll camp out and we'll give you food, water, and then you'll just wait for your appointment. I mean, it was a very much like an operation. And, one of the things that because I want to talk about them, but like they got a lot of assistance from American universities as well. There were actual clinics where students were going south to Tapachula and doing these clinics to like help these people qualify for asylum. And well, if you just look at that at its flat base level, like, well, what's wrong with that? Well, here's the problem is that a lot of people, if there's no asylee claim just by virtue of coming from Ecuador. There's a ton of countries out there.
Yeah.
And the United States does not give, we don't give like automatic asylee status to someone. I mean, we just saw it with South Africa, right? That was not a guaranteed thing out the gate.
Right.
And the way that, so someone would say, well, my country sucks and I want to come to America, I'm claiming asylum, automatically denied. Well, then they go back and what these law firms and entities would do is they'd be like, hey, but do you remember that time? Was there a time where maybe you got beat up by this guy?
You felt threatened.
Yeah, is your village, like somebody's going to come and kill you? Well, I don't remember it. Well, but now I do. And then they'd reapply. And so a lot of American...
So they're coaching them. They're coaching them. And when you said American universities, are you talking about like law schools, or are you talking about just just our colleges and universities here in the U.S., or what are you talking about?
Definitely law schools. But yeah, they'd be American law schools.
American law schools. Okay.
I've actually got like a couple. Well, and I've got real quick. One of these, I just pulled two random ones here.
Okay.
To see what kind of funding they had, and I'll get to the law school in a minute, but there was this one of the funders or one of the supporters of No Kings was Color of Change Org Education Fund.
Okay.
Okay. Well, if you go back. They go through the American Endowment Fund. They go all the way back to World Vision Incorporated. World Vision Incorporated, it was heavily involved in the border, the whole thing. So again, you've got these guys basically just helping, like assisting this. They're doing the No Kings thing, but they have also part and parcel of this is the Broad Institute was funding Color of Change, and they received money from Washington University and Northwestern University.
Okay.
And like not a small amount, like millions of dollars from a public university. I assume Washington's public. And then, but this is another one, and Center for Biological Diversity. And you take a look at like where their funding comes from. You got the Center for Biological Diversity. They received funds, and it's not a lot, but it's still like it's not nothing. They received funds from the Tides Foundation, which was involved in Media Matters. And then they received money from Georgetown University, $20,000. And Georgetown University sent two admittedly very good attorneys down to represent Catholic Charities Rio Grande Valley in McAllen. So it's like, so you've got this, Georgetown is sending attorneys to this there, and Georgetown they get federal money as well as anybody else through someone else. And then it goes to Center for Biological Diversity. Center for Biological Diversity then gives it to No Kings. The whole thing is cyclical. I mean, it's basically like it's cyclical. It's like this No Kings rally almost seems, there was, and I my brain's kind of running now because it's like there was this massive push to make sure that USAID could retain its funding at the end.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it looks like this is what
This is why.
this is why, or this is
Yeah.
one of the.
I feel like what you've looked up and uncovered in your research is like this tip of this iceberg, and the spider webs going to all of these organizations. I mean it's been going on for so long that money's been flowing back and forth. And why would tithes be given to Georgetown? And it's like there's a reason, right? They have a very specific purpose of what they do.
Right.
So they're not just giving that money away just because they feel like they want to support the university, but that's just sort of such a tiny piece of probably what happened when they uncovered what was going on at USAID. They found billions,
Oh, 100%.
billions and billions of dollars that was just shot out into this sort of shadow community of organizations. Probably some that didn't even know they were getting that kind of money,
Right.
but a lot of them that did, and it's how they funded everything. It's how they funded all of these programs and everything was going on the border. I mean, it's been you could probably go back and find some other tough issues that we've had to deal with that had everything to do with the same group of people.
Right.
And I'm sure I know that there's been a lot of talk lately of the DNC being also part of that too. They're connected in some way. I can't I don't know. I can't say anything. This is what I've been reading lately. I feel like we haven't gotten quite to the to the information that we really want to see, which is okay, who's really behind all of this and is manipulating all these people to do all these things, right? And these protests, some of which have become very violent. The one here was not. It was big. I mean, it was probably 10,000 people there. It was big, but it wasn't. It didn't get out of hand. And also the law enforcement, DPS and Austin PD did a great job. I watched their tactics and everything they did. It was really pretty amazing to see how they dispersed the crowd without things getting out of hand. But that's not working in places where you have a much more liberal society, like in California,
That's right.
in Washington State, New York, where things can get out of hand. I think New York's a little bit different because I think their PD is pretty tough.
It's looking like they're starting to walk it back a little
Yeah,
bit too.
yeah.
I saw. I mean, I'm not saying I condone this, but I saw a cop shoot a guy with a beanbag the other day on Twitter.
Yeah.
And the
think
guy
I
was
saw it.
basically like, he was like, "What are you gonna do about it?" Wham! And it's like, I guess that's what he's gonna do. I'll say this, just special shout out to the DPS here, and I mean these guys deal with this all the time, and that this is one of the things. I know it's politics and people like this guy or don't like that guy, but Governor Abbott has zero, colloquially FAFO when it comes to stuff in Austin. And I think the locals, especially after the Summer of Love or whatever that was, everybody is very aware. You're more than allowed to walk in. You're more than allowed to look around. You are not allowed to damage this place. That is a hard line, and DPS is utterly organized. Utterly,
It was unbelievable. And if you haven't been up close and personal, I had not. I mean, I respect law enforcement, and I would never do anything that I see these people doing on TV. But when you're there in person, standing 10 feet from someone yelling horrible, vile things to a DPS officer who's just standing there just taking it, and they're getting right in their face, and they just maintain their calm. And looking at flags being flown, U.S. flags being flown upside down, and all that, inside you're seething
Right.
because of the disrespect that you see, and those guys have to deal with that all the time, all the time.
It's crazy too because we've talked, and I was in the Army for a significant amount of time. There's not a lot of countries that let people. I mean, and we do, and that's a great thing. I mean,
Yeah.
I wish people would be nicer about it and not burn down our flags and all that crap.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, like, you cannot do this in the majority of the world. I mean, the majority of the world, you would not get away with this. And and to be a police officer and sit there, and a lot of it, I'll even say this: a lot of it's cowardice, right? They'll talk about how brutal the police are. But they know they know they can get in that guy's face. They can yell, curse, and do everything short of spitting at him.
That's
And
right.
sometimes they do spit at him.
Sometimes they do.
And they know they can get in there and do that to him, and they know that he's not going to do anything because he's going to follow the law. So how do you have this mentality where the law enforcement's evil, but at the same time, I'm going to get all up in this guy's grill because he's not going to do anything to me? It's crazy. It is this cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, exactly, and it's just completely upside down. I will, forever remember the experience, and of course, I mean, there was times, there was a couple times which started to feel like it was going to get dangerous. There's a couple people that got out of hand, but the crowd didn't get out of hand.
Right, right.
But I was a couple times where we were in the middle of it, and my producer Tom, he's there with a camera, and he's looking through the screen, so he's not seeing the craziness going on around him, and I'm just going, this is about to explode.
Yeah.
And we followed them up, Congress, and they turned them, and we just kept following them, and they kept trying to get to the federal building over here. And I just was very impressed with how the operation worked, because they never got out of hand. They even had the mounted DPS, and everybody was there, and everybody was on their best behavior. It was great.
That's what I was going to ask, because if they had the mounted, then it almost sounds like it was almost like a cattle drive, or it turned into like an impromptu parade.
It was interesting how they did it. I'll just say this: watching, like I said, I'd never seen this.
Yeah.
But you had this entire campus, this entire Capitol campus complex here, full of people from one end to the other, thousands, and then 30 minutes into the program starting, they decided to evacuate it. And so slowly they just started pushing everybody into the streets. And the idea, as I understand it, is, you get them out of the Capitol, and then they locked down the Capitol. It took a long time. It probably took an hour to slowly.
Right.
And then they'd get them down here, and then they were all on the street. And then they needed to kind of slowly push them. So they started moving down, and then they cut them off down at one end. And then you'd see the mounted police, DPS coming from up 11th Street here, with the new shades that the horses have on it, which is pretty cool. I gotta admit, and just kind of clopping slowly along, and as those people would see them, they would just sort of naturally start to move. They never got close to them to where they were horse to person like you'd see in L.A. But it was interesting because then they just kept turning them. Every time they would turn them to another street, more of them would peel off. And it was just like, little by little, everybody just finally just got tired. There was about 30 at the end that were just, that was the core of the group. And we stayed for a while, and then we were like, okay, I think we've seen enough.
It's almost like, our only weakness, walking.
They tired them out.
Yeah.
It was, exactly.
But it's interesting though, because like I said, whenever I was looking at their organization, now this is something I do want to touch on because I was really surprised.
Yeah.
So first thing I did whenever and I hate the term OSINT, especially a lot of people hate it, but it's open source intelligence.
Oh, okay.
Basically just means Googling. That's all it is. So I looked them up and I was like, how are these people organized? First thing I found was a Reddit page. 50501 is the primary organization that set this up. It stands for 50 states, 50 movement, 50 protests, 51 movement. But they've got a Reddit page. They're supported by another Reddit page, Political Revolution, which is sort of been an entity that's been in this space for a little bit. But the way they set up was absolutely incredibly organized. They used something called Assemble or Mobilize.us. And so basically that looked like it was a Craigslist for protesters, where they were saying, hey, we need volunteers. You can literally pick your event, pick your day. And then Political Revolution had a map telling people where they were doing their thing. They had trainings, online trainings. And this goes back to your people with clipboards and with their little road guard vests. I saw another, I cannot remember who broke the story, but there was another one that the other thing they'll do is they'll come up to a reporter, they'll take a picture of you. And if they take a picture of you, then what they're doing is they're running it through whatever database they have. I mean, that's a sophisticated operation.
It's pretty, yeah.
I mean, that's incredibly organized. And, here's the thing that's ironic is that so a lot of these people, I'm sure there's at least one sign saying, no billionaires. Okay, but Christy Walton was one of the supporters of this, and she's the Walmart heiress. But yeah, this was not the No Kings thing. Was not a grassroots. It was not an organic
No.
thing. It was absolutely funded, and people are like, okay, but I really believe in this top. But yeah, sure you do. But the way this goes from the bottom level all the way to the top is you're going to have somebody who's pushing an objective, and they're going to give you the money to do the things that you would like to do, but for the money.
Right.
And what they're gonna do, and then from there, all they have to do is just guide you until the next thing you know, you're getting tear gassed on 6th Street.
Yeah.
And this whole thing was just because you wanted to come to the Capitol.
To your exactly. So to your point, I think that's a great point. Is first of all, I think a lot of the people that are listening and viewing this podcast, you've seen on the news, you've seen that they one side will say that they were organized, another will say just an organic. What you discovered is that they were truly organized and sophisticated in the way that they were organized. I was here and I saw the handlers with their checklist and their clipboards running around these groups and stuff, and so getting to the people that are actually pushing that agenda is the tough part, because it's sort of like back in the day when they were going after the mafia bosses and they could never get to them because
That's right.
you couldn't connect them to any crime. Right. They were just funders, like the Walmart heiress. She's just a funder. And so they came up with the RICO statute to get to, all the way through all those barriers to get to the boss, whatever they ended up doing. And I think, I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know if they're going to try to do that or if they're going to get to that point. But otherwise, it's real easy to just throw your money into a pot and say, hey, just do good.
Yeah.
And then you have people down here who may be coming for maybe what they think is the right reasons. I think a lot of people came to protest.
Right.
Which is their right. Then there's paid agitators that get in the middle of this crowd, and then they start pushing them to do crazy stuff. And of course, when you're in a crowd, the crowd mentality it's a weird feeling, right?
Right.
If you start feeling that anger and that excitement going on inside the crowd, it's contagious. And so I think they've learned. It's pretty well documented, I think. But I could see this agitators that were inside the crowd. And
That's right.
It was always like just a few people, and they were dressed, the way that you would think an Antifa person would be dressed. And so it's pretty fascinating, but, I'm hoping that, all of the work that cutting off the USAID money
That was big.
should go a long ways. But I'm sure that, when you have big money, deep pockets like, Walmart, Eris and other people like that, Soros and other people, they could fund it on their own.
Well, and that's that'll be a big hit for them if that ends up being the way it needs to be. I mean, and that right there, if they want to fund it, whatever, they that's their money. But taking the government out of it, because whenever we were talking about like who's behind it, I think you and I talked about this. We were looking at funding for the border stuff, and because the whole case originated, the directive from the Attorney General, Ken Paxton, was basically like, we got to stop these human traffickers. Like, he was very serious about like all these children that are being trafficked. We got to stop it. And which I do want to give that mention to him, because the general, he never wavered in any of that. Even whenever the Pope was on 60 Minutes talking about it. I mean, that's
that's tough.
That's kind of daunting, right?
Yeah.
Like holy crap, the Pope's on 60 Minutes talking about this. It was Ken, the Ken Paxton, the general. It was just like, just keep going, keep doing it, whatever. So I just want to give that shout out. But yeah, in regards to these, if we take out the federal funding, if we stop funding these entities, that'll be a major hit, because at a certain point they're gonna have to pull back a little bit, because whenever it's your money, now you have to be more selective in how you spend it, or so I think that'll help out. But two things that were really interesting, especially in relation to this and the border, was we heard for 4 years under the Biden administration there was nothing we can do. We can't possibly fix this. Science doesn't have the answer. Trump gets in, and one of it was like week one. He got rid of that app, and it was like, wow, it was right there the entire time. Like, what's the easiest way to keep people from coming over? Get rid of the app that allows them to schedule an appointment that just comes over. Like, like just have them go fill out an app. It was crazy. Like, that was like the easiest thing. And then whenever they went in, and I think it was Marco Rubio and Elon Musk went in and they cut funding for USAID. Not only did that go a long way, and I think we haven't even begun to see, because like you said, they're still within their funding period.
Right.
We haven't even begun to see the long-term implications.
No, because they're still living off of the money they've got, and you can't pull that money. I mean, it's already been appropriated,
that's right.
So they've got it. Yeah.
And you know, and that's not knocking. You know, I don't know who's running USAID now. I do kind of know. I know they've been downsized. But the previous group that was there, the way they would have done it is obligated and then shipped it out as quick as possible. And that's probably what they did.
Yeah.
And I think O'Keefe Media Group or Veritas, I don't know who it was, and they're separate entities now, did a story where that's one guy was literally saying, he wasn't with USAID, I don't think, but that's what he was saying. It was like, we've got to get this money out now. Yeah. And he was talking about how that was a major muscle movement to get it out.
That was exactly right. That's exactly right. And I think what they did is they took what remained of USAID and they put it under the Secretary of State's purview now. So at least Rubio now has control over, you know, at least the function, the operations of the organization. So that's not going to happen anymore. I mean, he's got his people watching where the money goes, and there's legitimate organizations that probably need to be funded that are doing legitimate things. But when you had, you know, such a rampant fraud occurring inside of that organization to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars, and of taxpayer money. I mean, when every time, you know, our listeners and viewers all pay taxes, and every time you write that check, it hurts, you know. Whatever your tax, you know, mine's like 35+%, you know, and I'm like, oh, it's just, what am I working for, right? And then I think about that. And when I talk to my boys about it and trying to explain why it matters, I said, because if I make $100, 35 of that or more is going to the federal government.
Somebody else.
It's going to somebody else. And they're supposed to be spending it appropriately.
Right.
And when I see that they're spending it on stuff that is you know, hurting the things that I care about, I got a problem with that.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of the way I look at things always when I'm thinking about, you know, federal government and how they should act. You know, it should be the things that we need them to do.
Well, I'll tell you, with USAID, it was incredibly concerning for me to hear that USAID had domestic operations. And I'll tell you this, it's not a secret. USAID, they are an NGO, or they're supposed to be taking care of NGOs,
right?
But they're everywhere that the military is. Like, they are always facilitating NGOs. And you know, now that I'm out of the Army, you know, and Pete Hegseth is in charge, you know, I can say, like, USAID it is an asset. It is what, you know, they are built and designed to go into a country and to do the hearts and minds thing, to build American rapport inside of that country. You know, now I say that, and it sounds like a lot of their activity may have been destabilization. That's a federal issue that I'm not even going to touch with a 10-foot pole. I saw an interview recently that I'm not even going to mess with.
That's above both of our pay
yeah,
grades.
Exactly. But it is incredibly concerning for me that why would USAID be operating here? Like, you know, economic development in a foreign country. Why are you doing this here? And so whenever you find, you know, this, you know, these funds that they're using. It's like the National Democratic Institute getting funds from USAID. It's like, wait a minute, what is going on here?
That's a good point. That's a really good point. I never even thought about it that way, that USAID was not meant to be, you know, for domestic purposes. It was meant to be for international work and to support our international work going on. And that's a great point.
Well, the other thing too that was really good, something that I think people are going to see is Marco Rubio, he cut that staff down significantly, and that's something that really needs to happen. I know people are going to lose their jobs, and everybody's like, how can you be so heartless? But, like, here's the thing, is that the federal government has had a lot of issues with leaks, the deep state, people frustrating Trump policy. And that's not speculation. Like, these guys are writing articles in the Atlantic about being the resistance, right? It's harder to know who the resistance is when you've got this bloated 100,000 person organization, it's a little bit easier to find when you've got 200 people.
Yeah.
But there were some projects that I saw. I think my only ire was, I think there was $3 million that went towards, this is a true story, as far as I know, there was $3 million that went towards testing the aggression in hamsters. Now, I wish we'd have kept that program, but whatever. But yeah, there were a lot of these programs that just had these ridiculous names. And I was like, is it possible that there's a millennial who's handing out money and literally they're like, nobody will ever know. I'm just going to name this crab fighting or whatever it is.
You know it, right? You know it's true.
Because it's like, there was one that was the study of like, they put shrimps on treadmills allegedly. And I'm like, show me a video, because I don't believe that at all.
Yeah.
But
The hamster aggression, I can testify to, because I had hamsters and they were mean little jerks.
Well, the story was that they juiced them up with steroids, but I mean, I'm just saying, like, I mean, we could have kept that going. I want to see where that road ends, but nevertheless, though, but yeah, like, you had all these programs that made no sense, and then you had this entity that is a government asset. I mean, it really is. I won't go into the details of who works, or like some of the people that I've met who worked for USAID, where they came from. Like, if someone says I used to work for so and so, and you're like, oh, that's weird, I guess you're kind of doing a new thing, and then you realize, oh no, they're still doing the same thing. So yeah, I'm glad they're cutting that down. And the other thing I'll say is, even with a government organization, they may do good. USAID may have a foreign policy purpose, but actions have consequences. If you're going to turn those guns inward on your own people, adios. Funding cut.
Done.
That's your payment.
No. I 100% agree, and that's why we always, our agencies, at least at the state level, go through a process where they have to sunset.
Oh yeah.
And I don't think that the federal government has a sunset provision, but there should be a sunset that goes through, and where they look at them every so many years to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, and then they get they can get their funding if they are. This has been great. I mean, this has been some incredible stuff that you brought it. I think that we need to do. There's so much more. I want to keep digging and maybe do some more of these as we get further into it. I think we're going to hear a lot more as we hear a lot more about what happens with USAID, and also as we see how the lack of their funding is going to affect the direction of who's going to be funding these organizations.
Right.
And so I really appreciate you coming back on again. I hope you'll come on as many times as we can. And I didn't say it the last time, but thank you for your service. I
appreciate it.
We just had the 250th anniversary of the Army, and I've got a lot of Army veterans in my family. I've got a current Navy officer in the family, and so but thank you for your service.
I appreciate it. Yeah, that was the funniest thing is I think that the No Kings thing on June 14th.
Yeah.
It was the same day as Flag Day.
Yeah.
Ironically, it's Trump's birthday. But everybody was like, I was like, hey, it's the Army birthday, baby. I mean, like, I'm loud and proud. Where's that cake and the saber at? Let's cut it.
Exactly.
So
it's funny because there was a lot of people reporting that the people that came there to protest the parade, because they thought it was it was a North Korean, goose stepping, so that's what they were thinking it was going to be. And then they ended up going, it was actually pretty cool. We got to see like all of the history of the uniforms that they wore, and the different all the different tanks and craft that we have that the Army uses.
Yeah.
I mean, people were very impressed by it once they got to see it. If you've never been to one of those, not one like that, but I've been to a lot of these parades where you bring in like the drum and fife corps, and you have the drill team with the bayonets, and they do these. It's incredible, It's really makes you proud.
Well, I want to talk about that for a second, because here's the thing: I saw the same stuff, and it really goes to show. Like, we have some terrific teachers, we have some great public schools, but apparently not everybody does, because I saw all this fervor on the internet about. This is North Korea type stuff. President Trump's having a military rally during his birthday, and and it's like, wait a minute, it's like, you guys know this is the Army birthday. Like, it's the Army, but the Army is like, and believe me, the Army was here before Donald Trump was. So I think, on birthdays,
like long time ago.
we got to pick ours first. But one thing that one of the biggest giveaways was that you had soldiers that were dressed in time appropriate equipment.
Yeah.
So you had first cav soldiers. You know, I was gonna say, how do I know their first cav was the patches and the marching? No, I mean just. But you know, you had
Yeah,
first,
let's not talk about the march.
I know. But you had first cav soldiers there in Vietnam gear. You had 101st Airborne guys there in World War II gear, and so that's good for the soldiers. It's good for it's good for morale. It's you know, and honestly, it's good for America.
Yeah,
Hey,
absolutely.
look, this is the land of the free. That's how you get there. You know, and yeah, it just so happened to be on Donald Trump's birthday. But I guess, you know, they'll probably, if they do the same thing during the Marine Corps birthday, maybe we'll have a little bit less consternation about it. But
Maybe so.
we'll see.
I hope they do it. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty cool. I mean, those things make you proud to be an American. So, well, dude, I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
It's been great. And then you'll be back because we got a lot more to talk about.
Oh yeah.
So we'll see you next time, and appreciate you coming on
I
again.
appreciate you guys. I appreciate what y'all do. Thanks for letting me come on.
Absolutely, 100%.